You don't need a luxury kitchen to prepare gourmet meals. My name is Dennis. I live in a mobile home in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. Lately it's been cool in the morning here, and that to me is baking weather, and so I've been thinking about making bread again. Just recently I baked some Hawaiian sweet bread, and when I put the picture on the Facebook fan page, somebody said, "Have you thought about doing Portuguese sweet bread?" And I hadn't. So there was an idea. I did some research. I found a recipe that I thought was going to work. I put the dough together and ended up with this dry, stiff dough that was like pasta dough. It wouldn't have made bread. It would have made bricks. So I threw everything in the trash and I started again. That's the critical thing is with this baking is you have to have everything accurate, and you have to have the ratio between the wet ingredients and the dry ingredients, the water, the milk, the flour, the sugar, correct to get the dough that you want, to get the bread that you want. And that's why in a lot of these videos, when I'm making something like a bread, when I'm baking, I don't measure the flour with a measuring cup. I measure it in ounces and grams because that's a lot more accurate. I even have one textbook that will say something like use 5 pounds of flour and 3 1/3 pounds of water. They even measure the water by weight because it's so critical. So I think I have it worked out now. I think I'm going to end up with 2 loaves of good Portuguese sweet bread. So let's start baking. I'm going to start off by putting 1/4 cup, that's about 60 milliliters, of warm water, which is about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius, into a bowl, and then 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast. You can use instant yeast, and then a pinch of sugar to give the yeast something to work on. I'm just going to mix that in there, get it mixed up, and then let this sit for about 5 or 10 minutes. If my yeast is vital, if it's alive, if it's active, that yeast will start to foam, and that's my indication that my yeast is healthy. In the meantime, while I'm waiting for my yeast, I'm going to put 3/4 cup, 150 grams of sugar in a medium-sized bowl. And then I have warmed my milk. This is 1 cup, 237 milliliters of milk that I warmed to about the same temperature of the water, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius. I want to put my salt in there. That's 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And this is 4 tablespoons of butter, which is 1/4 cup, 2 ounces, 57 grams, and it's at room temperature. So the plan is to let that warm milk melt that butter. It doesn't have to be thoroughly melted, and you can see how it's starting to turn to a liquid already. My yeast is foaming wonderfully, so I need to start adding my wet ingredients to this bowl. But first I need to divide 1 egg. I've got this nice little egg separator here. My eggs, by the way, I'm using 4 large eggs, and my eggs are at room temperature. And you can tell by how slowly that's coming out that this is a very fresh egg. The reason why I'm separating 1 egg is because I want to use the egg white to make an egg wash later, but I can put the yolk in my batter. All right, I'm going to set that aside. Put my remaining 3 eggs in there. And I'm using a stand mixer because this is going to make the dough a lot easier to blend. Toss these in the trash. Done with that. Okay. And I fitted my stand mixer with my mixing blade. I'm going to use that first to start making a batter, and then when my dough gets thick enough, my batter gets thick enough that it starts to turn into a dough, I'll switch to my dough hook. So there is my eggs blended in. This is my milk mixture. That's the butter and the milk. And that butter, by the way, melted up beautifully. I did assist it a little bit with a whisk to break up any of the larger pieces. Going to blend this in. I have here 5 cups, which is 25 ounces or roughly 700 grams by weight of all-purpose flour that I'm going to incorporate now into my liquid. I might need to increase this by another 1/2 cup, 2.5 ounces, 71 grams if needed. I'm going to start working this flour in a little at a time using my mixing paddle to start off making a batter. And then once I get the batter thick enough that it starts to turn into a dough, then I'll switch to my dough hook and finish the mixing with that. So let me start off with putting in a good hefty scoop of flour, and I'm going to start mixing that in. When that's thoroughly incorporated, I'll add more. Okay, you can see what I've got here. A lot of dough now sticking to my mixing paddle. So I'm going to scrape all this off as best I can. And then I'm going to switch to my dough hook. And while I'm doing this, maybe I should explain what I'm looking for. What I want to see when my dough is at the right consistency, I want to see the dough pulling away from the side of the bowl. So it's not sticking to the side of the bowl, but I still see some sticking in the bottom of the bowl. That to me is a good consistency for bread dough. It indicates that it's moist and sticky, and a little bit sticky, and that it won't be too dry. I won't end up with a brick, in other words. Alright, I'm going to get that out of the way. I'm going to put the last of my flour in there, and then I have more flour here on the side. If I need to, I'll add more. Okay, what I'm seeing here is a pretty good dough, but it's a little bit too sticky. It's pulling away from the sides of the bowl, but it's still sticking a little bit. If I have to add any flour at all, it'll be like a tablespoon maybe. So that's what I'm going to do. Here's my additional 1/2 cup flour. I'm just going to put a small amount in there, like a well-rounded tablespoon. Maybe a little bit more. And then incorporate that, watch my dough, and see if I get the consistency I want. Alright, look at this now. I'm not going to add any more flour. Just that one addition was all that I needed. I'll move this out of the way. And you can see how around the outside of the bowl, or the inside rather, it hasn't been sticking, but it is sticking in the bottom. That's what I want to see. Some sticking in the bottom, but not to the side of the bowl. I'm going to return this now to my machine, and I'm going to knead this now for about 5 minutes to build up the glutens. It looks pretty good right now. I'm seeing some stretching there, some elasticity, but by working that more with my dough hook, it'll bring the proteins together that are in the flour, and it'll increase the glutens, the elasticity in the bread dough. I finished kneading this, as I said I was going to do. I went about 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Get my dough hook cleared off there. Put this aside. flouring my hands because I know this dough is going to be a little bit sticky, which is where I want it. I'm going to lift this out of my bowl. Beautiful. Some sticking in the bowl, but that's okay. Scrape out what I can with my fingers here. And that should be enough. Okay, in the meantime, I have buttered a large bowl lightly. And what I'm going to do with my dough now, oh, I love the feel of that. See, that's a nice bread dough. It's moist, tiny bit sticky. See, that's what I want, a little bit sticky. I want it to be a nice soft dough. I put this in the bottom of my bowl, and then I want to butter the top of this dough because as it rises up, I'm going to cover this with plastic, and as it rises up, I don't want the dough to stick to the underside of the plastic wrap. Okay. And then some plastic wrap over the top. I'm going to set this in a warm place. I like to put it on top of my refrigerator. And what I want to see, and it could take an hour, could take 2 hours, I want to see this dough rise up so it's coming up to this plastic. I want it to rise just over the rim of my bowl. There it is. As you can see now, the dough has risen. The dome of that dough is right over the top of the rim of this bowl. That took about 2 hours. So now I'm ready to start shaping my loaves. I have in the meantime lined 2 baking sheets. I have a half sheet here and a quarter sheet here. I'm using the 2 sizes because I can get these 2 side by side on the same rack in my oven. If I use 2 half sheets, I have to do them on different racks. So now I want to start shaping my loaves. I want to start off by punching this dough down, deflating it, taking it out of the bowl. And then I just want to knead this a little bit to bring this back into kind of a dough shape. Make sure I get the bubbles out. I'm going to divide that roughly in half. And then what I want to do is I want to bring the sides up, pinch it, bring it together, push it down inside, bring the sides up, do it again. What I'm doing is I'm shaping the top of this loaf. By doing that, I'm kind of stretching the top of the dough and giving it that nicely rounded top. I'll put that on my baking sheet. I'm going to cover these with plastic afterwards and let them rise again for maybe 1 hour, hour and 15 minutes, maybe even an hour and a half. I want to see a nice size loaf. So there are my loaves of Portuguese sweet bread after the second rise. This took just over an hour. There we are. And I have in the meantime been heating my oven up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is equivalent to about 177 degrees Celsius. One thing I do want to do is I want to just cut some slits. I want to score the top of each of these loaves. That'll allow the loaves to expand more. They won't be restricted in the oven. You obviously need a good sharp knife for this. Some people use a razor blade. I think if you keep your knife good and sharp, you don't need a razor blade. Do you remember that egg white that I set aside earlier? I mixed that with 2 or 3 teaspoons of water, whisked it up really well. Then I'm going to use a pastry brush to coat the surface of my bread here. I'm not coating it too heavily. I don't want a lot of egg wash to drip down onto the paper. But what this egg wash is going to do, it's going to give me 2 effects. One is it's going to darken a little bit on the surface. If you want a really dark bread, you don't use an egg white egg wash. Use an egg yolk egg wash. Then it just bakes really dark. And the second thing it'll do is it'll give me a nice shine. And if you can hear that, yes, that's a jet going overhead. I do live near the airport. I want to adjust this one cut a little bit. Those are now ready to go into the oven. I estimate that these are going to bake, I'm going to say 40 to 50 minutes. I'm going to use a digital thermometer. Normally what you do is you thump the bottom of the bread. If it sounds hollow, it's done. I use a digital thermometer. When the inside registers up over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, is about, what, I think it's about 93 degrees Celsius, then they're done. I want you to see these loaves now that they're out of the oven. Look at how beautiful those are. See, now you can appreciate the value of scoring the top of these loaves. It allows them to expand more. That outer part doesn't hold it all in. Therefore, you won't get a denser bread. You'll get a lighter, fluffier bread. Now, these have to cool thoroughly before you can slice into them. And the reason why is because inside hot bread, when it comes right out of the oven, the starches are still in a liquid state or semi-liquid state. By allowing them to cool, those liquids, starches, will solidify, and that'll improve the texture of the bread. You'll also notice it's slightly shiny, and with the egg yolk, the egg white on there, it's a little bit darker on the outside. So beautiful Portuguese sweet bread. Can't wait to taste these after they've cooled down. Isn't that a beautiful loaf of bread? This is one of those instances where something is so pretty you hate to cut into it. But I want to see what it looks like inside. Oh, look at that. Beautiful crumb. Beautiful loaf of bread. Can't wait to see how this is going to taste. Okay. I put couple of slices. I actually cut one in half because it was so big, and I put it in the toaster. That's good. It's mild, it's delicate, a little bit sweet. It's got like a soft texture to it. So, excuse me, I've got my toast, I've got my coffee. I'm going to go enjoy my snack. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit the White Trash Cooking website and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.